It started like any other day in the Pacific. The USS Princeton, a guided missile cruiser sailing alongside the aircraft carrier USS Nimitz, had its radar screens humming with the usual noise. Weather patterns, commercial flights in the distance, maybe the odd fishing vessel. But then, something strange appeared. At first, it looked like clutter, tiny blips flickering in and out of existence. But within minutes, those blips returned. And this time, they weren't acting like storms or airplanes. They were dropping from 60,000 feet straight down to sea level in seconds, then vanishing without a trace. No known aircraft could move like that. No drone, no missile, nothing in the Navy's arsenal. The radar operators double-checked their systems, convinced the sensors were glitching, but the same readings appeared again and again. The objects didn't just move fast, they moved with intent, accelerating, stopping mid-air, shifting directions instantly. They weren't following the laws of P, they were following something else. Within hours, the Princeton had logged multiple contacts. Different altitudes, different positions, but always the same impossible movements. For the crew, a quiet tension spread across the command center. This wasn't a radar error anymore. It was real. And then the decision was made. If those blips were out there, someone had to see them with their own eyes. The call went out. Scramble the fighters. The order went out, and the deck of the USS Nimitz roared to life. 2 FA-18 Super Hornets were launched into the clear Pacific sky, tasked with investigating the strange contacts the Princeton had been tracking for days. Among the pilots was Commander David Fravor, a veteran with thousands of flight hours and a reputation for precision. He'd been on countless intercept missions before, but this one felt different. The reports from the Princeton weren't describing a rogue aircraft or enemy drone. They were describing something impossible. As the fighters closed in on the coordinates, the ocean below came into view. Calm seas, no ships, no signs of life, but hovering just above the water was something. At first glance, Fravor thought it might be a downed aircraft or debris floating on the waves. But as the jets circled lower, the object moved. It wasn't a plane. It wasn't a balloon. It wasn't anything he or anyone else had ever seen before. It was a small, white, oval-shaped craft. Smooth, featureless. No wings, no rotors, no exhaust. Just a glossy capsule-like body that looked eerily out of place against the vast ocean. The pilots were trained for combat, for missiles and dogfights. But this was something else entirely. And then, before they could even decide what they were looking at, it moved. What Fravor and his wingmen saw that day would later become one of the most famous encounters in modern military history. The object was small, about the size of a fighter jet, but its shape was unlike anything in the Navy's arsenal. Smooth, white, oval. No cockpit, no tail, no visible engines. Just a glossy capsule that pilots later described as looking exactly like a Tic Tac. At first, it hovered just above the waves, darting slightly as if it were observing something beneath the surface. The pilots banked, trying to get a closer look. That's when the Tic Tac reacted. It turned, not slowly, not with the wide, graceful arc of an aircraft, but instantly, like it had no weight at all. It locked onto Fravor's jet, as if it had been waiting for them. Fravor dove in closer, trying to cut it off, but in an instant, the object shot upward, stopped dead in midair. Just a blur, and then it was gone. The pilots were stunned. Training, experience, instincts, none of it prepared them for this. They had encountered enemy fighters before, but this wasn't combat. It was like trying to chase a shadow. Then, something even stranger happened. Moments later, the object reappeared, 60 miles away, at the exact coordinates where the fighters had planned to rendezvous, almost as if it had read their minds. This wasn't just advanced technology. It was impossible technology. And for the men in those cockpits, one chilling thought set in. Whatever they were chasing out there in the Pacific, It wasn't playing by our rules. Back on the radar screens of the USS Princeton, the data confirmed what the pilots had just witnessed. The object wasn't moving fast. It was moving impossibly fast. From 60,000 feet in the air to sea level in less than a second. No sonic boom, no heat signature, no shockwave. Every law of physics said that should have been impossible. A maneuver like that would have crushed a human pilot into dust. Yet this thing moved as if inertia didn't exist. Even stranger, it didn't just outrun the fighters, it outthought them. Every time the pilots tried to reposition, the object moved first. When they attempted to intercept, it vanished. And when they set a rendezvous point 60 miles away, the object was already there, waiting. It was as if the Tic Tac knew their playbook before they even opened it. To Fravor and his wingman, this wasn't just advanced technology. It was intelligent. Something or someone was in control. And that left only two terrifying possibilities. Either another nation had developed technology centuries ahead of anything the United States possessed, or this wasn't human technology at all. Back aboard the carrier, the pilots were still in shock, but the real storm was only just beginning. When the Super Hornets returned to the Nimitz, the flight deck looked the same as it always did. Jets being refueled, crews hustling across the deck, the smell of jet fuel thick in the air. But inside the ready room, the atmosphere was anything but routine. The pilots were rattled. They'd just seen something that should not exist, and they were expected to file a standard debrief. Commander Fravor described the Tic Tac's movements, the impossible acceleration, the way it seemed to anticipate their every turn. Some of the younger crew laughed it off, calling it a flying breath mint. Others sat in silence, trying to process what they'd just heard. But while some dismissed it as a strange fluke, the intelligence officers weren't laughing. They quietly pulled radar logs, sensor data, and cockpit tapes. The information was classified immediately. No wide distribution, no open discussion, just silence. And there was one more twist. When technicians went to review the recordings, some of the key footage had already been pulled. No explanation, no paperwork, just gone. For the pilots, the encounter ended in confusion and whispers. But for the Navy, this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Someone, somewhere, was already treating this event as far more than a joke. And years later, the world would find out why. For years, the Tic Tac incident remained buried in classified reports. The pilots who saw it firsthand spoke quietly among themselves, but outside the strike group, almost nobody knew. Officially, it didn't happen. That silence broke more than a decade later. In 2017, leaked footage, grainy, black and white, hit the internet. It showed a small white object darting across a Navy pilot's targeting screen, moving in ways no known aircraft could match. The audio was almost more powerful than the video. Navy pilots, usually calm under fire, could be heard laughing nervously, cursing, and admitting they had no idea what they were chasing. The clip spread like wildfire. News outlets, skeptics, conspiracy theorists, everyone wanted answers. The Pentagon tried to stay quiet, but the pressure kept building. And then came the shocker. The Department of Defense confirmed the video was authentic. They didn't call it a UFO. They used a new term, UAP, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. But the message was clear. This wasn't fake. The footage was real. And whatever the Navy had encountered, the government couldn't explain it. Theories exploded. Some swore it was advanced Chinese or Russian drones. Others believed it was a secret American black project that even the Navy didn't know about. And of course, thousands insisted it was something not of this earth. But beneath the noise, one fact stood out. The U.S. Navy had encountered an object that defied everything we know about flight. And they weren't the only ones. The Tic Tac was not an isolated incident. After the footage leaked, other Navy pilots began stepping forward, describing encounters eerily similar. Objects hovering in the sky, disappearing at impossible speeds, performing maneuvers no human aircraft could replicate. The Pentagon quietly confirmed these weren't one-off sightings. In fact, a program known as the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, ATIP, had been tracking these unidentified aerial phenomena for years, quietly gathering data on what seemed like a growing pattern. Other aircraft carriers, fighter squadrons, and even drones recorded anomalies. The objects appeared near training exercises, testing areas, and sensitive military zones. It was almost as if someone, or something, was watching, studying, probing the U.S. Navy. And the question that kept analysts up at night was simple. If these objects were not ours, then who did they belong to? Were they advanced foreign drones, experimental military craft, or something far beyond human technology? The Tic Tac incident forced a shift in perspective. Pilots were now trained to treat UAPs as serious threats, not jokes. Sensors were recalibrated. Intelligence officers tasked with compiling every shred of evidence, and new protocols were quietly introduced across the fleet. What began as a single unexplained blip on radar had evolved into a global phenomenon, raising questions about airspace, national security, and, even more chilling, the limits of human understanding. The ocean and sky were no longer just the domain of sailors and pilots. Something else was out there, and it was proving just how small and unprepared we really were.